Kia ora, hello, my name's Bart de Vries and I'm the founder of Physio here at Limba, and today I am very lucky to be joined by Gourab Kar. Dr. Gourab Kar is a postdoctoral scholar at the School of Public Health, working with Dr. Christina Banks at the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces at University of California at Berkeley. Thanks for coming and hanging out, Gourab. Today's chat, we just want to kind of get a little bit of an insight into Gourab and his working life, and also his studies and the research that he's involved in, and a little bit of the background to that, and why he's interested in this stuff and why he's studying it and where he thinks it could go. But the first question I've got for you, Gourab, is what does a day in your work life look like?
Thanks, Bart. And when I say a typical day, I would say a typical COVID-19 day. I do not work from home. I am lucky enough to have an office, which I walk to my office. The best thing is I wake up and I can decide when to wake up. And once I do that, then I now have to walk for about an hour to reach my office, and I love that walk. It rejuvenates me. It gives me ideas, and there's something that happens to me after that hour when I'm physically into my office. I'm a different person. I'm alive and awake. And what I do is turn into the office, get a little more of water into my system. I drink water, turn on my computer, and what I do is I do sit on a chair, but I perch on a chair. I put in some extra cushions, and that's what is my typical posture. So I perch for most of the time that I'm seated, or I'm rather perched. Yeah. And then sometimes I just walk up. The question is, when do I stand up and walk? Haven't really measured myself, and that's a great thing. I should be measuring myself. I'm a researcher and haven't researched myself enough. So that would be my typical behavior. How long do I do this? It depends on the activity and the deadlines for projects. Usually about 6 to 10 hours a day is when I spend time in the office. But because this is my space and I'm the only one working, I take a little bit of a break and I just rest on the floor using constructive rest. And then I'm happy being in the office with myself, and I take care of my body and mind when I'm at work. And that, I think, is a great feeling.
When you say constructive postures on the floor, what do you mean?
Okay, let's imagine you have a rigid, flat surface, let's say the floor. Yeah. And you are lying on your back with your head looking up into the ceiling. What constructive rest does is, imagine your two legs form the sort of an A shape. So they're about at 45 degrees, and they're a little splayed apart, and your head is kind of rested on a cushion, a small cushion. You can fold a towel and get it to the right height. Yeah. If you are in that position and it needs somebody to help you get into the position first time, and this is based on practice of the Alexander technique, and in my case, my mentor, Galen Kranz, helped me learn it and helped me align myself in this horizontal plane. And if you lie there for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, 15 is a good time, then you actually have your spine kind of elongating by itself, because now it doesn't have to work vertically against gravity. Mm-hmm. And it's not just your spine that just gets lengthened. What I have is a physiological and a psychological change that I see happening to me. When I rise up from that position of constructive rest after 15 minutes or so, I feel more energized, I feel happy, I feel I'm more focused on my work. And again, cool. Right now, feelings, I also know that I could measure it with a few other people, run a study and see if it actually works.
This is your anecdotal
little project that I will do very soon. So having constructive rest sometime in the middle of the day, or maybe having multiple rests across the day, and see how it changes your behavior, your productivity, and does it really improve your health? And again, health is a very big construct, and there are multiple indicators. But can you look at some acute parameters? Let's say, how's the blood flow to your brain? Or how are you breathing? Or is your heart rate variability changing towards the better? Again, I'm making all these wild suggestions, but again, these could be grounded in data and science, and we will know more about it once we do some of these studies.
So that kind of covers off the next couple of questions I have. One of them is what are the environments that you're working in? So this environment that you're at now, you've got a chair that you perch on because you've put cushions on it, and you have is it a variable height workstation or?
This is not a variable height workstation. I do have a limber in the next room, and I'm running studies on the limber, and that's why I'm keeping it separate. Only for the study duration. I am tempted to use it every day, but I'm kind of withholding myself. Like, okay, this is for the study for now. And then once it's over, once the first pilot study is over with about 20 participants that I anticipate having, then I could kind of start playing with the limber. I want to play with it. And it's not going to be work anymore. It's going to be play or fun of playing.
And so do you work from a laptop and have an external monitor or keyboards? Are they just standard keyboards? Are you kind of traditionally set up, or how is it?
A wireless keyboard, and it kind of use Bluetooth and then connects to your laptop. The laptop's connected to a bigger screen. And that's the usual setup, and lots of greenery around me.
I can see that behind you.
Yeah.
Do you find the greenery something that's important to you? Is that something that you've set up yourself, or is that inherited in the office?
It has been inherited in the office, but I do take care of the plants and water them once a week. Makes me feel better again, and then I have healthy life forms kind of supporting my work, I guess.
Yeah, good. All right, well, if that's the anecdotal stuff, then tell me about some of the area of interest of your research and the work that you've done to date. Like, what is it that you're interested in?
So it's been a very interesting journey. I started off as an architect and an industrial designer, and I was designing chairs, ergonomic chairs, and they could be sold for a fortune. And each version would be more ergonomic than the previous one. And of course, designing desks, mostly designing desks with a static height, and then also designing height adjustable desks. And while kind of doing it for about 10 years, being a designer and an architect, I started to realize that, well, it's all these devices are for the human being in the first person, and maybe we should understand things from the first principle, what it is to be human. There are so many ways of looking at it, but if you look at the physiology of being human and also, let's say, the psychology, and then these two come into what I would say is ergonomics in a way. There's so many other things come in. And I was interested in understanding the ergonomics of postures, primarily seated postures. And again, when I say seated, there's an assumption that it's chair sitting, but this chair sitting is only just one of the multitude of options. You could be seated on the floor, on a small support to your back or to your butt, or you could be just seated on the floor, on the bare minimum floor. You could be seated in different ways. You could be kneeling, you could be sitting cross-legged, and a multitude of other ways of being seated. And you could also be perched, which is what I'm doing right now, which is somewhere between standing erect and seated in a chair. It gives
kind of
you
like bar stool height sitting, right?
Yes, something like a bar stool height sitting. It opens, or let's say, it opens the angle between the hip and your spine, and also the angle between the hip and the thigh. And it well, helps you align your spine. And this is something that you got to experience it yourself once you are in this kind of perched posture. You do
Mm,
not need to support your spine with a backrest. You are
yeah.
self-supported. You are using gravity the way the human system was designed to work in tandem with gravity.
Mm,
And from there on, I realized that it's not just posture by itself, but posture and movement. That's the combination. And that's what life has been. And that's what evolution has kind of helped us fine tune. And somehow, in our obsession with designing or specifying chairs and tables, we've forgotten that it's all about movement and change. That's the key and
mm,
that's the essence.
yeah.
That led me to look at research where we were saying what would be ideal frequencies of movement, or when should we induce movement during during work in the office, both in terms of how long should this movement be and what should be the intervals in which we bring in movement. That was my doctoral research. Uh,
Mm,
and well, in a nutshell, I can say uh, move often. And when I mean to say often, every 30 minutes of your time when you are seated, assuming that you are chair seated, if you move for 2 minutes of a time within 30 minutes, that's a good start. What you can also do is for that 30-minute interval, if you could be chair seated for about 20 minutes, a max of 20, and stand for about 8 minutes, and then go for a 2-minute walk. Just go around to a walk to the other cubicle where your friend is,
mm,
or walk to the water cooler, or go to the bathroom to take a break and come back. It's that movement, and
mm,
movement both in change of posture, that is movement in the vertical axis, and movement as a walk, which is in the horizontal axis. And let's say if you are also climbing stairs, which gives you both of it,
yeah.
that's key, and that's something that you have to do once every 30 minutes. So that's what I kind of researched for
When
the
you
last.
say once every 30 minutes, um, why? Like what does it achieve? Why, and what's the downside of not doing it? You know, are we trying to keep an equilibrium of health, or when you say this what needs to happen every 30 minutes, for what outcome?
So again, this is where the science of it is evolving as we speak. So I can't make a definitive statement, but what
Yeah.
happens is the movement induces, or we believe the movement induces certain changes in your physiology and in your biochemistry. So the movement, especially of the muscles of the lower legs,
Mm,
we believe triggers certain hormones and certain enzymes, which help in digestion. This is also linked to the creation of blood glucose and something that leads to type 2 diabetes.
yeah.
And so if you can move often, and by often again, I'm making this thumb rule of once every 30 minutes,
Yeah.
then that helps your blood glucose levels to be in a healthy level.
Yeah.
It also reduces your risks of having cardiovascular disorders. Also, what happens is when you move, there is more blood flowing to your brain. And some studies have shown that this improves your cognition, this improves your reaction times to certain tests. And
Yeah.
again, there is so much more research to do, both in terms of how your brain performs, how you breathe, how your cardiovascular system works, how your cardiometabolic system works.
Mm,
And in the long term perspective, if you are moving more often across the day, short intervals of movement, but throughout the day, then you could live a healthier life and live for longer. Again, this is not definitive, but this is what the
mm,
research suggests. Short bouts of movement improve health and potentially improve productivity in the office. On a side note, just walking around for a little while and coming back is shown to improve creativity in creative tests. So there is a lot to this puzzle, but we know movement is critical. We're trying to decouple these complex parts of the puzzle and see how things work at a molecular level.
yeah.
But again, my part of the puzzle is, as we understand the science or the evolution of the science of sedentary behavior, what can we understand as designers and as public health professionals? And then what are the simple tips that we can give people, both in terms of changing their own behaviors and also changing the physical environment around them?
Yeah.
So
And
long-winded answer.
it doesn't sound like you're saying every 30 minutes you need to do 2 minutes of CrossFit and high intensity. It sounds like the level of activity is actually quite low. So there's a low
Yes,
threshold for that activity
it
to
is
make a
actually a
change.
pretty low threshold. You have a very good point. And I read a lot of work, say, about the last 20 years of research. And
Yeah.
maybe the initial idea was high intensity activity is important. The reason was that you could only, your sensors that you had were only able to measure high intensity. Over the
Of
last
course, it's
10
high
years,
intensity.
we've got smarter sensors, well, smarter and cheaper and more accurate sensors. And now we're able to measure very small movements. Like if you just fidget around, even that is a movement that's recorded, and that can be related to your health status at that point in time. And what we realize as more studies come in, as this low intensity activity is actually important, not because its intensity is low, but because it happens across the day. So by a fraction, like if it happens for a fraction of a second, the magnitude isn't that high. But it happens throughout the day for you, the cumulative amount of movement that you get is beneficial. And so
Yeah.
every 30 minutes, if you stand up from whatever position you are, or even if you're standing, every 30 minutes, take a break, go for a 2-minute self-paced walk and come back, is going to have exponential benefits for you. Simple technique, doesn't go, and it'll
Yeah.
work wonders.
It's fascinating. Also, like as the research develops, the decoupling of or the understanding that inactivity has its own set of physiological effects and hormonal effects decoupled from intense physical exercise. I think that's something that's new in the last few years, at least, where the understanding that you sit all day at work and then you go to the gym for an hour in the evening, and it actually does nothing to offset what's happened throughout the day, because the build up of the impact of the inactivity throughout that day has its own physiological effect outside of the high intensity physical activity. Of course, there's an overlap of benefits and things like that, but largely these are two separate physiological cycles that are now being understood and being further researched. Is that clear?
And,
is that something
I just
that you
wanted to add something to the story.
Yeah.
And this happened across maybe the last 15 to 20 years. And it goes to, actually the credit goes to the International Space Station and all these astronauts who keep flying there and then coming back.
Yeah.
And what happened is they ran a study where a group of US astronauts, and I think US and Russian astronauts, were out there in space for a sustained amount of time, at least a few months. And what happens in space is you have kind of microgravity, very close to zero gravity. And the entire physiological system kind of doesn't know what to do because gravity is so low there. And therefore your bones start to become weaker. Your muscles, they become weaker, what you call is muscle atrophy. And then when people come back to 1G, when the people come back to Earth and back to 1G, they need to kind of, again, get in tune with gravity. And they ran this study with a group of people who would get a little bit of exercise every 30 minutes. And then another group which would get into high intensity exercise for an hour a day. And the rest of the time they were just not sitting. They were something called the bed rest studies. So they were on the bed, sleeping or supine on the bed for all the time in the world, except for 1 hour of high intensity exercise. The other group was also supine on the bed, but every 30 minutes, they had a short but not very intense exercise. And the recovery for the group that had shorter durations of exercise throughout the day was much faster and the group that had this high intensity exercise once a day.
Mm.
So we have to credit the people who went into the space stations and came back for some
That's
research that had
amazing.
more benefits for people, I think, on Earth, or for everybody
Yeah.
on Earth. Yes.
Yeah. And it kind of plays into the whole, well, the kind of the way our bodies shift and change so rapidly when we do little things often, like the small behaviors in our life that have a massive
Yes.
impact on how we feel, and or even like the small thoughts that continually occur that have an impact on how we
Right.
feel. But it's the things that we do most regularly, we often are so unconscious about, that have such an impact on our life, how we feel, and what we're able to do. The other thing that brought up as well, which is the idea of non-activity exercise thermogenesis. Wow, what a
Yes.
it's a tongue twister, right? But again, that's basically the idea of movement that's below an exercise threshold. So something that's, tying your shoelaces or something like that. These are activities that people perform a variable number of each day that actually have a huge impact on our physiological and hormonal system.
Right.
And yeah, figuring out how to play with that, I guess. Well, talk me through what you're working on right now and the research that you're doing at the moment, and what's the thinking behind it.
Yes. So right now I'm working on a pilot study with the limber, and I guess you're familiar with what the limber is, and most people in the audience would be.
Maybe
So
ever. Yeah.
for me, as a researcher, the limber is a wonderful platform to test out this idea of movement, which means change of posture. And that's what I'm looking at in my pilot study. We are looking at a group of people who are going to work on a computer with a standard chair, replicating the typical office conditions of working, where you have a chair and a desk. And then we compare this with the same people using the limber when they are seated on the floor for 20 minutes and they stand up and work for 10 minutes. So it's a 20 of floor sitting plus 10 of standing. And then you repeat the cycle for another 30 minutes. So you have a 1 hour block in which people do a combination of floor sitting and standing. And you compare this 1 hour block of work with another hour of working while you are seated on a chair and typing on a computer. The work is very simple and kind of you are typing whatever you see on the screen. It's a typing transcription task, so it's not the most creatively engaging work, but that's the standard research practice for the last 30 or 40 years or so. So it's a pilot study. We're trying to see, are there changes in performance that occur between these two conditions? Is there a change in your perceived level of discomfort that you feel at 15 different parts of your body? And we measure discomfort at the baseline, at the very beginning, at the 30-minute mark, and at the 60-minute mark. We're also measuring your physical activity levels. We have an active PAL sensor, essentially a very accurate accelerometer attached to your thigh. And that gives us movement of your thigh for a 1 hour duration, and we get those measurements at every 15 seconds. So we got a rich data about movement. And again, the movement of your thigh would correlate with the movement of the rest of the body parts. It's a pilot study. We're only looking at one part of the body and measuring its movement in two conditions. We were also looking at how your heart rate and heart rate variability would change across conditions. Unfortunately, due to technical bugs, we weren't able to get that ready for this experiment. So we're measuring discomfort levels. We're also measuring fatigue. I forgot to mention that. So discomfort, fatigue, typing productivity, and physical activity or movement. These are the 4 things we are measuring between these two conditions. And I anticipate having between 16 to 20 people in the study. And hopefully once the data collection is done in a month or so, I will then delve into what the data means and analyze it and see what what results it has for all of us.
Cool. And is this novel research? Is it something that's been done before? And is there kind of, what's the thinking and behind, like, why is it important?
So what's maybe the most important or interesting or novel part of this research is we are looking at floor sitting. There's been 20 years of research on sit-stand workstations, about, I would say 25 years of research on sit-stand workstations, at least in the US, and honestly 30 years or more if you include Scandinavia, or if you look at the global perspective. All of that research has assumed seating or being chair seated. So the change in posture is seated on a chair and then standing. And sometimes they've also included an in-between posture of perching. So all research that you know on sit-stand work has been on chair sitting, standing, and perching, and different ratios, different durations, and how it affects productivity, discomfort, fatigue, and blood flow, muscle activation. Every other thing has been looked at. But then nothing has been done on floor sitting, and floor sitting is an universe in itself. And from a very common sense perspective, if you're seated on the floor and then you rise up and stand, there is much greater physical activity. The muscles do so much more work against gravity, which means you are expending more energy in one way. The other thing, and this is where I have my own biases, I come from a culture of being trained to floor sit when I grow up, and that was because I was from India. If you know how to sit correctly on the floor, then you are very well aligned. Your spine is wonderfully aligned with gravity. And that is something that hasn't really been scientifically tested. So we really do not know much about floor sitting, except that it's been a practice that has been there for a few thousand years. We evolved as floor sitters, and then I think in the last few hundred years, we suddenly jumped onto a chair. And so it's good for us to kind of go back to the first principles and look at floor sitting and the science of it. And the limber is a great platform to test a lot of these ideas very quickly and efficiently. And that's why I was attracted to the limber. This is a pilot study, so it's just the very beginning. I would say the tip of the iceberg. But let's see what the data reveals, and then that'll open up another universe of possibilities.
What is some of the future that you see? Like, what are some of the interesting aspects that maybe that are happening around the world, and where you see this research going?
One is just the idea that sedentary behavior or sitting for long durations is bad for health, and this is the public health perspective that has been debated right now. And everyone who talks about sitting and sedentary behavior assumes that we are all sitting on a chair. I think we should relook at that very basic assumption. There is a fundamental flaw in there. Seating has a lot of possibilities. Chair sitting is only one of them. It might be the most dominant in the Western world, but that doesn't mean all the science only looks at chair sitting. So we could expand beyond the chair and looking at seating and the physiology of seating and sitting, both the posture of it and the behavior of it. And that could expand on whether sitting by itself is bad for health, or certain modes of sitting and certain modes of being static are bad. So that expands that conversation. We could also look at what happens in terms of movement and how movement changes blood flow, and specifically blood flow to your brain. And if that is so, then does it have a link with neuroscience? Can we actually measure the brain performance when we change our postures? And is that a good thing for us? That's another exciting possibility. Creativity, neuroscience. There's some research on older adults above the age of 65, which show that if they move more often, there are lesser chances of dementia that come in. Again, this is a tangential angle to this research, but you never know what exciting new research opportunity could come up. It's always it's a fun with research is you go in with a certain perspective or a question, and you come up with 10 other more interesting questions. And floor sitting research, I think, is one of those exciting areas where we are going to bump into some really new and fascinating aspects of human behavior that we don't know of or we haven't measured well enough.
It's the beauty of the unknown. It's the kind of the frontier of possibility, because you're just waiting and watching and observing and seeing what kind of insights turn up. It's awesome. I'm going to have a chat with Galen Kranz next week as well, so we can get more insights into the journey of the chair and where the chair came from and why it's so prevalent in society, because it's an interesting perspective to again think of sitting a little bit broader than just in a chair. But with so much of the population, of the globe's population, already using the floor as a primary kind of sitting and seating and resting environment, the impacts of that on how people move and how they feel and their overall health across their life is, it's going to be fascinating to watch what you find. The last question I've got is I'm going to send this out to people who've got limbers and are part of kind of the limber family. I'm curious if you've got any thoughts for them or any questions for them that you'd find interesting hearing a response back from, as anecdotal info from your.
I may have a lot of questions if I simplify.
I guess
one or two. One would be, what is their default posture when they start off with the limber? Because the limber gives you a range of possibilities, right? So what is the default? And when do they change their posture from the default? And I think there'll be a range of responses, and it would be wonderful to hear from and know about these two aspects of limber from them.
So what's the default posture that they start in? And then what is it that causes them to change position? Is that right?
Yes. And kind of, if they kind of also know when that happens. I know people are not going to measure themselves with a stopwatch. That's my job.
It could be some,
Yeah, some might. And then what kind of triggers them to do it? If they do it, what triggers them? And that's, well, I guess I asked 3 questions, even though you wanted one.
Yeah.
But I'm very greedy in terms of knowledge. So.
Well, thank you for hanging out. I think is it Friday evening in California
Friday
right
evening,
now?
and it's Saturday morning for you, so you're awake and purring.
I'm into my weekend routine. I had a nice workout and movement session this morning, which gets me going for the weekend, which was always nice. But thank you so much. Thanks for all of the effort as well that you're putting into this research and all of the thinking, and it's fun for me to sit on the sideline and to be able to watch what the work that you're going through and the thinking that you've been kind of working through, and being a part of that has been fun for me. And I can't wait to see what some of these, even though it's pilot studies and it's only a small number of people, it's still interesting data, and it's the start of I guess like a kind of a new research field in this regard. So I'm excited to see what comes of it and see what you find and see what kind of your next thinking evolves from it. So thank you.
So thank you very much. Just as excited as you are, and as I would say cautiously optimistic as a researcher can be. And again, thank you for creating and providing the platform called Limber. Without it, this research wouldn't have happened. So
that's awesome. It was actually kind of quite uncanny, really, how this whole thing came about. And with Galen Kranz, who's the professor that you say that she's your mentor at Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then that you were coming over at the exact time that I met her, and that you're interested in this floor-based posture work, and that we'd created this workstation that allows for that, which nothing else, I don't think anything else so far that we've seen actually does. And so there was an amazing sense of timing and uncanniness that has led to this relationship and this research and being a part of it. So the world is a small and funny place sometimes.
Yeah, and we have to solve problems for about 8 billion people. So
it's true. All right, awesome, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave you to it, and we'll sign out from here. The best posture is the next posture, right?